Felicitations, malefactors. Welcome back to Random Pick. This week, our special guest is none other than Jon Becker.
Hello, I am the random pick.
Yes. And this week, we're going to be talking about Warhammer, specifically like the tabletop miniature game. So I guess why don't we get started? Jon, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and maybe what got you interested in Warhammer in the first place?
Sure. I'm Jon, and just a dude that paints miniatures to never actually have an opportunity to play them on the tabletop. um, but a couple years ago, my brother, he had been collecting for a long time, and he is a dedicated Imperial Guard player, has almost nothing else from the entire game. And I guess that's kind of fitting for him being a Marine. He wants to play human Marines, which is totally cool. But he bought me a start collecting box for our wonderful robot overlords called the Necrons, and haven't looked back. Basically got hooked on it. And it's really cool because it's not just a game, but people who play it put the time and money into picking the faction they want and then painting them, and then eventually, hopefully, playing the game. And it's this cool collaboration of a community that really appreciates art and also gameplay with each other.
That is really neat. I would agree with that statement. So, speaking of factions, did you stick solely with the Necrons, or have you branched out to different
Oh
groups?
boy. No way, man. I actually own 5 different armies now. I'm not the kind of guy in any game that I've ever played, Magic the Gathering, other card games, computer games. Like, I can't just stick to one thing. Like, I love having a variety of play styles, a variety of unique abilities to use and try out. So, I actually have, let's see, it started with Necrons, and then I got into a faction of superhumans called the Adeptus Custodes, which are like the pinnacle of human, I guess, technologies involved there, but I'll call it human evolution within the 40K universe.
Okay.
I also have Space Marines, which are also another human subfaction. Chaos Demons, which are like some of the big bad guys in the universe. And Imperial Knights, which for you mecha lovers out there are giant, like literally gigantic fighting robots. Not really in the style of like Gundam or anything. That's a different army, which exists.
Oh, okay.
But giant fighting robots. And it's a podcast, so unfortunately you can't show you pictures of them, but they're awesome.
Excellent. Are they like Pacific Rim, like giant robots,
Yes.
like that kind?
Yes, that's much more accurate. They're much more similar to Pacific Rim, um, in scope and design. With I think the thing that kind of defines them a little bit more is like they have massively wide torsos, and I guess that's kind of indicative of the human technology. When they build walker type vehicles, they always have their legs don't look stumpy or tiny or anything like that. Kind of like Johnny Bravo. Like if you imagine him, he's got tiny legs and a huge torso. It's not like that. The legs are actually decently proportional. But Johnny Bravo's torso is pretty accurate. Like they've got those wide shoulders and the arms hanging down from below them. So I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic. The other subfaction that has giant mechanical robots called the Tau, and I did have a force of them. Ended up selling them. Just not my style.
Sure.
But yeah,
I just want to see a giant mech now with like a giant Johnny Bravo hairstyle, like fin on its head.
Oh man, I'm sure it exists. Like people do some crazy things in this game, and that's like one of my favorite things to do now is just go through. I'll like Google a random army and just look at the crazy conversions and techniques and styles people have based their armies off of. because people do all kinds of crazy things, and it's fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, no, my senior year at college, one of my roommates, Ross DeLong, collected a lot of Warhammer stuff, and just watching him like put together the little figures and like paint them and stuff was really cool because each player likes to put their own little flares on their stuff, I would say.
Definitely, that's awesome. I didn't know Ross did Warhammer. I mean, I wasn't in
Yeah,
it back then, so I might not have been interested, but that's cool.
yeah, he's a huge Warhammer guy. He is also super into the art like role playing tabletop like D&D version of Warhammer, which is great. I'm actually in a campaign of his that he's running currently, and it's been pretty fun. But that's a Dark
I
Heresy campaign.
I should have guessed that there would be like a role playing within the 40K universe, but I did not know that it actually existed. So that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, we're
uh,
currently doing Dark Heresy, and then one of the campaigns he ran while I was in college was
mhm.
Rogue Trader, which
Okay.
is you're basically space pirates,
Yep. Yep.
and that was
I
super fun.
I don't know a lot specifically about either of those, but occasionally I'll see people looking for or selling like Rogue Trader era models. And I guess the Rogue
Mm,
Trader goes way back to the beginning of like Warhammer lore and everything. I think it was like their second wave of stuff that came out was entitled Rogue Trader. And that was a
yes.
huge part of building the backstory. And I know things have deviated since then,
Hmm.
but uh, people still reference it and use it as a source of inspiration, which is awesome.
Right, and another thing I learned about Warhammer, since it's been around for a little while, like longer than I thought it was,
Hmm.
pretty much almost all of StarCraft is based off of or inspired by Warhammer 40K.
Yep. Yep. Let's just take a few different armies. Space Marines can be Space Marines. Tyranids will rename those Zerg.
Yeah,
Uh, I guess
Eldar. I think the
Protoss will be the
Eldar.
Eldar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eldar or Tau. I'm not sure. I don't think Tau was. I'd have to look it up, but maybe Tau came out after StarCraft did. I'm
Mm,
not sure. But both of those factions, Eldar or Space Elves for you people who don't know
hmm.
much about 40K, are, yeah, Eldar and Tau would probably be the most likely equivalents for the Protoss.
Yes. So obviously the actual miniature game is the whole point is you're kind of like having battles as lots of games do.
Mhm.
So other than like is like the main primary goal just to destroy all of your enemy's units, or is there like other ways to win other than that?
So it kind of depends. Actually, the most recent edition that came out, ninth edition, kind of turned the game on its head in that respect. Because prior to this edition, and I've only been playing again for a couple of years, I believe the only thing to do was really wipe your opponent off the table. Um, so I started in 8th edition, and that was basically it. You could make an army that was basically just a gun line and sat in the back of the field and blew your opponent to pieces as they tried to approach you to get into melee range, or have a really fast army that tried to charge across the table on turn one and prevent your
Hmm.
opponent from being able to blow them up fast enough.
That that sounds like an
But
orc thing.
orcs actually, they can do both. They've got
Hmm.
this whole faction called Speed Freaks, which is all about their vehicles and getting around the table quickly. But they also are actually a very shooty army, surprisingly
Okay.
enough. They're not great at it, but
Ah.
they make up for not being great at it by just having the numbers that it doesn't matter if they miss because they shoot so many guns that they're gonna hit you.
Lots of DACA.
Yeah, more DACA. um, so yeah, prior to 8th edition, I'm not sure if they had anything like objectives um,
Hmm.
that gave you points or anything. However, like I said, in ninth edition, objective based gameplay is the only thing that matters now. So each
Oh wow.
player will pick. Let me back up a little bit. There is a main objective for the game type that you're playing, And so you'll have objective markers that you place on the table, and you control those objective markers by having an infantry unit or a unit with an ability called objective secured within 3 inches of it. And so, these main objectives can be, all right, obviously you get points for controlling objectives or controlling more objectives than your opponent, but sometimes they'll have a secondary objective that's like, okay, get into your opponent's deployment zone on their side of the table and spend a turn with one of your units to raise or destroy that objective marker. And so you'll gain points based on how many objective markers you destroyed. And then to build off that, to give even more variety in gameplay, each faction has its own objective rules, and each player can pick 3 secondary objectives that they want to try to fulfill over the course of the game. So obviously, you'd like to pick some that play to your army's strengths. So, for example, the giant knight army that I was talking about earlier, they don't have infantry at all. They don't exist in the army. So either you need to bring infantry from another faction that can be used as allies, or if you just want to play giant robots and you play knights, you've got to be more thoughtful about which secondaries you pick. Because in 8th edition, the knights were great at just wiping the floor with people because they could just sit back, use their giant guns, and blow the opponent's heavy units off the table turn 1 and 2, and then win the game. In 9th edition, they can't control points, so even if they blow up their opponent's army, they lose half the time because the opponent outscores them in points. Even if you destroy your opponent's entire army, you can lose the game. And that is kind of super interesting. And like I said, that completely changed the way the game is played.
Yeah, it sounds like a very intense and slightly more complicated game of capture the flag.
Yes, in a sense, that is accurate.
But that is really neat. So, out of the factions you've played, is there one that was kind of like your favorite, or that you've enjoyed more than the others just because of like their mechanics?
I've got to say, so I haven't had a chance to play my Imperial Knights yet, but I'm looking forward to them. I would have to say Chaos Demons is my absolute favorite so far. And the reason for that is that they have giant, awesome demon models that are they're called greater demons. And first of all, they just look cool. And I'm a sucker for having giant things that look amazing and are super powerful and with great abilities. So you can play a few of those on the table, and you still have room for their great infantry options. And so the Chaos Demons are a really versatile army. They can get a lot of different things done because your opponent, first of all, has to deal with these hordes of lesser demons that are marching up the field at them and controlling points, while they have to deal with the threat of the giant greater demons. And it's just so flavorful for me seeing these giant models on the field that, are commanding these legions of lesser demons. And so that has so far been my favorite experience in the game. And like I mentioned, my brother plays Imperial Guard, which is a very heavy gunline army. They like to sit back and just kind of shoot me off the table. And when I was playing Necrons against him, the Necrons really kind of struggle against that playstyle. So game after game, I just get blown off the table playing the Necrons because they're more of a mid-range army. They don't have the same range that the Imperial Guard has. So I'd have to spend turns 1 and 2 marching up the field to get even within range where I could shoot him. But by then, he's killed all of my major major units. So kind of a rough experience.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine that there are definitely certain matchups for different factions that are better or worse. So yeah, I mean, I think that's generally with lots of games that have lots of moving parts or different factions or things like that. Even like with any sort of strategy game, there are certain strategies or play styles that are just strictly better against specific other play styles.
Yeah.
And
That's absolutely true. I mean, the same kind of almost rock paper scissory kind of thing exists within this game. Like in Magic, for instance, aggro
mhm,
generally beats control, mid range beats aggro, and control beats mid range for various reasons that I'm not going to get into here. That sort of exists here. Thankfully, the
okay.
thing that sets this game apart is the human element because you're not restricted to just like a 60 card deck and the pool of cards available to you. You've got the entire book of rules for your faction on top of any allied factions that you want to bring. So, like, for example, Chaos Demons can also be allied with Chaos Space Marines. Two separate armies,
Mhm.
but because they share the Chaos keyword, you can play them both in the same army. So, if you know if you're going to play in a tournament that there's a lot of a certain type of army, you can cherry pick other units from an ally to bring with to supplement and hopefully make your matchup a little better. And I know, that the argument kind of falls apart there. Like Magic, you have a sideboard, you can shuffle in new cards and make things better for you. But what I want to get to is the fact that there's the human element, and there's a lot more flexibility because we're employing strategy here. So, for example, like a professional player who puts a list out there for Chaos Demons, if I were to go online, build that exact same army, and put it on the tabletop because he got first place at like the biggest tournament in the world, well,
Mhm.
I'll probably get beat left and right because I'm not that good of a player. I don't have the same strategies. I don't know what his game plan was that made those pieces work.
Sure.
Um, so everybody, has their own unique play style that is going to factor in here. So while yes, technically Army A might have a great matchup against Army B, the player who's piloting Army B might know, okay, I've got a game plan. I know the counterplay. Um, I can use positioning and terrain to flip some small situations into my advantage that are going to change the outcome. And I think that makes a bigger difference in this game
Mhm.
versus, say, a card game. I'm not saying you can't have that
Sure.
kind of interaction in a card game, because there are definitely great
Mhm.
players who can flip situations around. I just think there's a little more room for it when you're playing a tabletop based game. So balance is kind of weird. It's like, Games Workshop has to change what guns do, change what units do, change point values, all that kind of thing, to try
Mhm.
to balance the game. But then you've just got players out there who are going to find the most broken interactions and be able to apply those on the tabletop. And I don't know. There's a lot more variables, is what I'm trying to say, uh, in such a long
Sure.
rant.
Yeah, no, that's definitely like I definitely get what you're saying. It's kind of like the player gets a lot more input and like influence on how they can control their board than just like a card game where you're limited to basically what the cards do.
Exactly.
Or like
Exactly.
so it kind of functions like Dungeons and Dragons where it's you have all these different rules that you can utilize, and of course even if however much the writers or whatever balance everything, players are still going to
Hmm.
find those weird combinations that just break the game.
Yep. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's I think that's really neat and it's fun. And it's great that, there's that much room to play with, for strategy and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think that is super cool. I guess for those out there who have not played the game or may be interested in it, I know you said your brother got you into it. So for
Hmm.
those out there interested in maybe starting Warhammer, where would you suggest they start or like start to pick it up?
Yeah. It's actually relatively easy nowadays. I mean, the biggest difficulty is the financial hurdle. Obviously, a new player isn't
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to spend necessarily the hundreds of dollars that it takes to play like a full sized game. And I mean, that's not where anyone really should be starting either. The way
Sure.
my brother got me into the game, like I said, he bought me a start collecting box for, I can't remember if it was Christmas or my birthday or something. Um, But Games Workshop makes an entire line, and I'm pretty sure just about every faction has one of their own. So you go out there, you pay like $80 to $95 for a start collecting box, and it will contain 2 or 3, maybe even 4, depending on the army, different units and types of models that you can start off with. So you have a small force, you build it up, uh, get your friend involved, get them to start collecting box too. You both can enjoy and experience the hobby side of it, building, cleaning up, and painting the models. And generally, I get the sense that most people want to just kind of jump in and play the game. So you pick up a copy of the rules, and I mean, I believe they have like a PDF with the shorthand version, so you can start playing the game and trying it out without having to buy the full rule book until you're ready to make that step. So you can at least get the basics pretty easily, and then literally just go to your dinner table, put some books out there, maybe some cups as terrain, and that's how you start. That's where everyone really starts, is playing Warhammer with like a few models, tiny game, just to get used to how things work and getting used to reading like the data sheets that have the information of each model's abilities and weapons. And take it slow, take it one step at a time, and just play a bunch of small games until you're comfortable and you have more money so you can expand your army. Then you can play bigger games. Maybe you'll start building your own terrain. Maybe you'll buy terrain from somebody who makes it and paints it. I've done both. You can get some great results with some really simple stuff. And that's, I think, the kind of the essence of the game itself is like they really wanted people to just pick up a few things here and there, build it, paint it, experience the hobby, and play small, enjoyable games with their friends. And I know there are pictures out there of these amazing terrain sets, and there are people on YouTube and people on Twitch that stream games, and they've got these incredible setups. That's like the end goal. You don't have to jump in and put down $1,000 to make your setup that nice, unless you want to right away.
Yeah, and that's super cool. And for those out there who thinks that maybe $80 to $90 for a game is expensive, I will tell you that any sort of hobby game like this, I would consider it. You will spend at least that much, if not more, to get like a top of the line like Magic the Gathering deck. Like even for like any format, you're going to be spending at least $100 probably to get all of the best cards, and that might be for like standard. Just for that. If you're going back to older formats, it's gonna, the price inflates like incredibly. Or any type of game like that, where it's a game where you can collect all these different pieces, and even for like, a normal board game, you're going to be spending $50 to $60 for a game that may or may not play out very similarly every time you play it.
Right.
Where Warhammer, you have all this different. The possibilities are endless.
They are endless. They are. And well, the nice thing here is card games tend to have like a standard format that rotates out. Your deck becomes invalid, and you have to go out and, every few months buy a new set of cards to redo things. With Warhammer, as expensive as it possibly could be, there is a hard cap on how much you could potentially spend on an army, because you're only allowed 3 of the same type of unit. So like let's say I want to use a unit called a Bloodthirster, I can only have 3 of them on the table. So I'm never buying more than 3. And that's probably never going to happen either. Like 1 is fine, and 1 is still kind of questionable in a competitive setting right now.
Okay, sure.
But my point is, like, if you really wanted to go and max out an army, depending on the army, you're spending maybe $800 total, or $1,000 total, and that's over the course of years, obviously collecting it as part of the hobby. Now that said, there is this wonderful thing called eBay, and people are always throwing up used models, painted, unpainted, unbuilt, and they're always at a discount too. Okay, maybe not always. Some people really put a lot of stock in their painting skills and do commission paint jobs. Obviously, if you've got a commission painter out there putting his stuff up there, it's probably not going to be cheaper. But generally, you can find cheaper models, cheaper armies on eBay or others, are like online stores, and that kind of lowers the barrier to entry, which is nice. The only thing there is you're putting a lot of investment up front for an army that you are not necessarily sure you're going to like. So one of the best things you can do is if you have a local game store in your area that carries Warhammer, or an actual Games Workshop store in your area, go to them, ask to play some games, obviously within COVID restrictions. Like if you're vaccinated, great.
Right.
If they let games happen, but you have to wear masks, great. Just get a feel for the different factions. Go to Games Workshop's website, Google it, like look up all the information about the factions that you might be interested in when you're getting started, and make sure that this is the army you want to play. Because if you don't have a ton of money, you might buy an army that you don't really like, and then it's kind of hard to shift into a new one because you've already spent the money. Unless you want to find a guy to trade with on Facebook or something, like in a Facebook group, or you can sell your army and then buy a new one. But that takes a little bit of effort. So it pays off a lot to do your research beforehand, unless you go into the game like me, planning to have one of every single army eventually someday, because you want to enjoy that variety. So unless you're
That's
that rare
ambitious.
person, yes, it is quite ambitious. I'm sure by the time I'm 60, it will happen, and I'll still be playing. But um, yeah, do some research, figure out what you're interested in, what's your aesthetic, um, what story speaks to you. There's tons of different ways to decide which army you want to play, and then how to get into the game. On that note, I wanted to mention the hobby side of this.
Mhm.
Painting and painting resources is also a kind of a sinkhole for money. A lot of new people get into the game and they're like, okay, they either have no clue what kind of painting
Mhm.
supplies to buy, or what kind of paints are good, or where to even get them. Um, I will say that there are hobby paints that many companies make that will do much better for you and perform much better for you when you try to use them than just your average craft store paints. So
Mhm.
please do not go out and just buy a bunch of paints at a hobby store, especially if you don't know anything about the different types, because you might buy oil paints, you might buy inks, and you might buy just things that are not going to be easy to work with for a new beginner to painting. So if you don't know much
Sure.
about painting, here's a little bit of advice. You don't need a billion colors. You don't need to go to Games Workshop or Army Painter and buy like their giant like full collection and spend like $200 or whatever on getting all those paints. You don't need that. Get a few, stick to them. You can mix paints together to create new colors that you want to use. So like get a few neutral tones and then pick out a color that you want your army to be. Like I want my army to be red. Okay, pick one red, because you can mix that with like brown or white to darken it, change the color, and that way you save money. You can get used to some
Mhm.
different painting techniques. And don't go out buying the most expensive brushes either. You don't need it. You can get away with like a cheap set of synthetic brushes. Now, as you get better, I would not recommend them, but you can get away
Mhm.
with it while you're learning. It's all about the process. Take time building yourself up, gain the knowledge over time. Go to YouTube, watch a bunch of videos. There's some great people I watch on YouTube for painting. Miniac, Midwinter Minis, Ninjon. They have helped me get so much better at painting throughout the time I've been doing this. And then there's also great people you can watch on YouTube for like learning how to play the game, or watching battle reports, where they basically play a game on YouTube streaming for you. Tabletop Titans is one of my favorite ones. Like, go check them out on YouTube. Huge production quality, everything. Great resource for learning how to play the game and getting insights competitively. And so hopefully that information that's out there, and maybe what I've said, if you're interested, will help you decide what your starting point should be when you try to get into the hobby.
Well, that is excellent. I think we have that's a great scope of potential outlets for people to be able to look into if they want to get started, or if they are still getting or just got started, or still a seasoned player and want to branch out and everything. They have all those opportunities, which I think is great. But
Mhm.
I think we are just about out of time. So I wanted to thank you for coming on the show, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and if we have the opportunity, I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, for sure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. You're welcome. So once again, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for those listening at home. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, please leave a like and or subscribe if you're so inclined. And if you want to hear about specific topics on the podcast, leave them in the comments. I'm always open to finding different topics about what people may want to hear about. So once again, thank you for listening to Random Pick. We'll catch you next time.